The mysterious arrival. It was a quiet afternoon when the first ship arrived. No one on Earth expected it, but the galaxy had been watching. The sleek silver craft descended slowly into the atmosphere, cutting through the sky with a smoothness that seemed impossible for something so large. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the sun's rays like a mirror. The world paused, waiting to see what would happen next. The ship came to a soft landing in the middle of a desert. No one had seen it coming. There were no warnings, no messages, just the ship, suddenly there. As soon as it touched the ground, a massive door slid open, revealing the alien beings inside. They were tall, their bodies covered in strange, reflective armor. Their eyes glowed a faint green, and their movements were calm, almost too calm. They didn't seem to have any weapons, but their presence alone was enough to make people uneasy. The alien species, calling themselves the Exorithians, had sent no prior communication. No one knew why they had come. Governments around the world scrambled to figure out what to do, sending diplomats and scientists to the landing site. They tried to keep calm, hoping the visitors meant no harm. But the Exorithians didn't speak, not at first. Instead, they stood in a perfectly still line, watching everything with sharp, calculating eyes. As the humans approached, they were shocked by the strange behavior of the Exorithians. These beings weren't panicking or trying to communicate through sound. Instead, they were watching, studying, as though waiting for something. The humans tried to speak to them, but the Exorithians remained silent, their eyes never leaving the crowd that had gathered. Then the dogs came. Dogs were a common sight on Earth, always loyal and full of energy, and often found by their owners' sides. But what happened next would change everything. As the Exorithians stood there, motionless, the dogs began to react. The dogs, who had been calmly sitting or lying down, suddenly started growling. Their bodies tensed, their ears perked up, and their noses twitched as if they were sensing something that no one else could. The humans glanced nervously at each other. The Exorithians didn't seem to react at first, but the dogs weren't stopping. The growls grew louder, and more dogs from around the area joined in. Some barked loudly, while others paced back and forth, their tails stiff with unease. There was something about these alien visitors that made the dogs feel uncomfortable, almost as if they could sense something dangerous. The humans were confused. They had never seen anything like this. The Exorithians, who had advanced technology and knowledge far beyond human understanding, didn't seem to notice the dogs' strange behavior. They continued to stand still, their eyes glowing faintly, scanning the crowd. But the dogs, they were fully alert, their sharp instincts making them restless. It wasn't long before the first dog approached the closest Exorithian. The dog walked cautiously, its eyes never leaving the alien's glowing form. The Exorithian's gaze followed the dog, but it didn't move. The dog stopped just inches from the alien's feet, barking loudly in a high-pitched tone. The sound was strange and eerie, echoing in the quiet desert air. The Exorithian, unfazed by the dog's bark, didn't move a muscle, but the humans around them began to whisper, trying to figure out why the dog was acting this way. They had always known that dogs had a certain sensitivity, but this was different. There was something in the air, something these dogs could feel that the humans couldn't. As more dogs joined the group, the Exorithians finally seemed to notice the tension in the air. They glanced at each other, their eyes narrowing. For the first time since landing, a low murmur passed between them. They didn't speak words, but the humans could feel the shift, the unease in the air. The Exorithians were clearly uncomfortable, but they didn't show it outwardly. What was happening? Why were the dogs so upset? And why weren't the aliens reacting the way the humans expected them to? These questions buzzed in the minds of everyone watching. Meanwhile, the dogs continued to bark and growl, their attention fixed solely on the Exorithians. The alien visitors seemed to be studying them now, their eyes flicking between the dogs, then to each other. It was as if they were trying to figure out what was happening. The Exerithians were known for their advanced technology, but nothing in their studies had prepared them for this moment. They had never encountered anything like Earth's dogs, creatures so attuned to the world around them, so aware of what humans couldn't see. It was at that moment, as the dogs became more agitated and the humans began to realize that something wasn't right, that the first alien ship's true purpose was beginning to unfold. It wasn't just a diplomatic visit. The Exerithians hadn't come to form alliances or trade knowledge. No, there was something else they were looking for, something hidden, something Earth had that they needed. And in the midst of it all, Earth's dogs, with their sharp instincts and quiet strength, were the only ones who truly understood the danger. The Exerithians had come for more than just exploration. They were here to find what Earth's dogs had sensed all along. But no one, not even the most advanced beings in the galaxy, could have predicted the force that Earth's dogs truly represented. And the galaxy would soon learn why these animals, seemingly so harmless, were the one thing it feared the most. The first contact with the Exerithians had begun, and Earth's dogs had just given the first warning. The unseen power. As the Exerithians stood unmoving in the desert, Earth's dogs continued to react in ways that no one could explain. The sound of barking filled the air, an unsettling, almost primal sound that reverberated off the dry, cracked earth. It was as if the dogs were sending a warning, one that no one could yet understand. The humans, standing at a distance, exchanged uneasy glances. They had always known that dogs had sharp senses, able to detect changes in the environment long before humans could. But this was something entirely different. The dogs weren't simply reacting to a change in the air or a shift in the weather. They were acting as though they could sense a danger in the very presence of the aliens. The Exerithians remained still, almost statuesque, their glowing eyes scanning the horizon. They didn't flinch as the dogs continued to bark and circle, their sharp teeth bared and their bodies taut with tension. It was almost as if the aliens were waiting for something. But what? The human officials, who had been sent to observe and negotiate, began to grow nervous. This was supposed to be a historic moment. First contact with an advanced alien species. But now, with the dogs acting so strangely, they began to feel as though something was terribly wrong. They had expected to exchange knowledge, share ideas, maybe form an alliance with the Exerithians, but the events were quickly spiraling out of control. One of the scientists, Dr. Alan Rivers, was the first to speak. He was a leading expert in animal behavior, particularly canine instincts. These dogs, he said, they're reacting to something we can't see, something we don't understand. A few of the military personnel, standing nearby, didn't look convinced. What do you mean? The dogs are just nervous. They're probably reacting to the aliens because they're new and strange. We all do the same thing in the face of the unknown. But Dr. Rivers shook his head. No, this isn't normal behavior. These dogs, they're not afraid of the Exerithians. They're warning us. He paused, then added, I think we're missing something here. The dogs sense something dangerous, something the aliens are hiding. His words sent a chill down the spines of those standing around him. What could the dogs sense that they couldn't? And why were the aliens so unreactive, so calm in the face of these warning signals? As the crowd grew restless, one of the dogs, a large German shepherd, suddenly stopped barking. It stood perfectly still, its eyes fixed on the Exerithians. The dog's body was rigid, its ears pinned back as it stared at the alien visitors. Then, with a low growl, it slowly began to approach them. The humans gasped in disbelief. The dog was walking straight toward the aliens, unafraid, its movements deliberate and measured. The Exerithians, who had been silent up to this point, shifted slightly, their glowing eyes following the dog's every movement. But they made no effort to stop it. The dog paused just a few feet from the nearest Exerithian. Its nose twitched, and it sniffed the air, as though trying to detect something that only it could sense. The Exerithian's glowing eyes remained locked on the dog, but it didn't move. It seemed almost intrigued. Then, the dog did something that stunned everyone. It sat down, right there, in front of the alien. Its posture was calm, relaxed even. It was as if the dog had found the very thing it was looking for, something that no one else could understand. For a moment, everything went silent. The Exerithians and the humans watched, holding their breath. What was happening? What was this dog doing? Dr. Rivers, still watching carefully, muttered to himself, "This isn't just a reaction to the aliens. The dogs are acting like they know something about them. Something we don't." The air seemed to thicken, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The Exerithians remained still, but the tension was palpable. The dog, completely unfazed by the aliens, stayed seated, still watching them with its intelligent eyes. Then suddenly, one of the Exerithians made a subtle motion. It reached for a device at its side, a small metallic object that appeared to be some kind of communicator. The human observers, still in shock, could only watch as the alien carefully activated the device. A low hum filled the air, and the Exerithians exchanged a series of soft clicks and murmurs, their language completely unintelligible to the humans. The dogs, still vigilant, kept their eyes trained on the aliens. The growling and barking had stopped for now, but the warning was clear. Something was coming, something that the dogs were aware of, but the humans had yet to comprehend. The Exerithians' communication seemed to last only a few moments, but to the humans, it felt like an eternity. The aliens appeared to be talking among themselves, but they were not making any moves to leave. In fact, they seemed more focused than ever. As the hum of their communication died down, one of the Exerithians turned toward the human delegation. It spoke for the first time, its voice strange and mechanical, yet carrying an undeniable authority. "We did not come to negotiate. We came for the dogs." The words sent a shockwave through the crowd. The dogs, still sitting calmly in front of the Exerithians, were the focus of their attention. The humans stood in stunned silence, trying to process what had just been said. "We need them," the Exerithian continued, its voice cold and unwavering, "for a purpose you cannot understand." And just like that, the truth began to sink in. The Exerithians had not come to Earth to trade knowledge or make allies. They had come for Earth's dogs, the very creatures that had unknowingly become the galaxy's most feared threat detectors. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to learn just how powerful Earth's dogs truly were. The hidden truth. As the Exerithians' cold words hung in the air, the humans were left in stunned silence. The implications of what they had just heard were staggering. These aliens who had traveled across the stars were not here for trade, knowledge, or alliances. No, they were here for something far more unexpected: Earth's dogs. The human delegation, which had been prepared for formal discussions, stood frozen. The shock of the moment left them disoriented. How could anyone explain such a request? What was it about these seemingly ordinary animals that had drawn the attention of an advanced alien species? Dr. Rivers, who had been the most vocal in defending the dog's unusual behavior earlier, was the first to recover from the initial shock. "You want the dogs?" he asked, his voice shaking, both out of disbelief and an underlying concern. "What for? What purpose could they possibly serve you?" The Exerithian, still unmoving, met Dr. Rivers' gaze. "You do not understand yet," it said, the mechanical tone of its voice seemingly unbothered by the human's incredulity. "We have been hunting for centuries, seeking a species that could detect the anomalies in the fabric of space, the ones that threaten the very stability of the galaxy. Your dogs are the only ones who can do this." The crowd stirred. The idea that something as simple as a dog could possess the power to detect cosmic anomalies was almost too far-fetched to grasp. Dr. Rivers, who had dedicated his life to studying animal behavior, couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Could it really be true? "What do you mean by anomalies?" Another human, a military officer named Captain Larson, asked, his voice steady but filled with skepticism. He had no intention of letting his people be swayed by an alien species that had yet to explain itself properly. The Exorithian didn't flinch, though. It seemed to have anticipated such questions. The anomalies are disturbances in the quantum fabric of the universe. It explained slowly, almost as if speaking to a child. They are the result of forces beyond your comprehension. Forces that could tear apart civilizations, entire star systems, or even the very laws of physics. Your dogs, they can sense them. Your people call it danger, instinct, but it is far more than that. It is a primal awareness of disturbances in the quantum field. We have been searching for beings like them across the galaxy. The statement made no immediate sense to the humans. The idea of dogs being able to detect such complex, cosmic threats was incomprehensible. But as they looked at the animals around them, calm and focused, their eyes bright and alert, something about the Exorithians' words began to click. The dogs had been acting strange from the beginning. Their behavior around the aliens had been one of silent warning. The way they had reacted when the Exorithians first arrived. It all made sense now. They weren't just nervous or scared. They were sensing something dangerous, something the rest of the humans couldn't detect. The military officers began murmuring amongst themselves. What was this? How could such a thing be true? How could Earth's humble dogs possess abilities that not even the most advanced civilizations had discovered? Dr. Rivers, who had spent countless hours studying canine instincts, suddenly felt a chill in his spine. Could the Exorithians' claim actually be real? Could Earth's dogs truly be aware of something cosmic, something threatening in the very structure of the universe? The silence stretched on for a long moment. Finally, Captain Larson spoke up again, trying to steer the conversation. Why haven't you told us about these anomalies before? Why didn't you warn us? The Exorithian's eyes flickered for a moment. We did not wish to alarm your species. The presence of the anomalies is rare. But when they occur, they are catastrophic. Only those who can detect them will be able to act in time to prevent total destruction. The dogs, your dogs, are the only ones capable of sensing them with such precision. Why us? Dr. Rivers asked. Why our dogs? Why not another species? The Exorithian's gaze shifted, and for the first time, the alien appeared almost thoughtful. You do not realize it yet, but Earth is special. It has always been special. There is a unique frequency here, a resonance in the planet itself that amplifies certain instincts, ones that other species have long lost. Your dogs, they are the key. The humans exchanged confused glances. Earth, special. What could that possibly mean? Before they could ask another question, the German shepherd that had sat so calmly in front of the Exorithian suddenly stood up. It raised its head and let out a single sharp bark. An alert. The dog's body stiffened, and its eyes focused on something far in the distance. The air around them grew tense, almost suffocating. The Exorithian's gaze locked onto the dog. It didn't move, but its eyes were full of understanding. It had been expecting this. We must go now, the Exorithian said abruptly. The anomaly is coming. Your dogs have sensed it. Before anyone could react, the Exorithian activated a device on its wrist, and the once still aliens began to move with purpose. The dogs followed suit, growling and standing ready, as if they knew something was approaching that would require them to act. The humans watched in awe and terror as the Exorithians and the dogs disappeared into the desert landscape. The air was thick with tension, and for the first time since their arrival, the humans realized the full weight of the situation. The Exorithians hadn't just come to Earth to observe. They had come because Earth's dogs held the key to something much bigger than anyone had ever realized. Something far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. The unseen threat. The humans remained frozen in place, their minds racing. What had just happened? They had barely begun to comprehend the magnitude of what they were being told, and now they were left with more questions than ever. The Exorithians, alongside the dogs, moved swiftly and purposefully toward the horizon, their figures vanishing into the distance. Dr. Rivers, Captain Larson, and the rest of the human delegation stood still reeling from the shocking revelations. They had come to this desert in hopes of an ordinary diplomatic exchange, not to become entangled in a cosmic conspiracy that threatened the very fabric of their reality. "We need to follow them," Dr. Rivers muttered, his voice tinged with urgency. He couldn't quite explain it, but something deep inside him told him that the situation was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Captain Larson, ever the pragmatist, nodded. "I agree, but we need to be careful. This is no longer just about diplomacy. We're dealing with something far beyond our understanding." The two of them, along with a handful of officers, quickly gathered their gear and set off in pursuit of the Exerithians and their canine companions. The landscape around them stretched on endlessly, the dry earth cracked beneath their boots as they marched forward. As they moved deeper into the desert, the tension in the air grew thicker. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The dogs, now leading the way, were more alert than ever. Their ears twitched at every sound, their bodies rigid with anticipation. The Exerithians, walking in perfect synchrony with the dogs, were completely unfazed. It was clear they had been through this before, and they were prepared for whatever was coming. "What exactly are we looking for?" Captain Larson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Rivers paused, glancing over at the silent aliens. "I'm not entirely sure, but whatever it is, it's big. The Exerithians wouldn't have come here unless they knew it was going to happen. And those dogs, whatever they're sensing, it's something they've never encountered before." They continued on, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the desert. It felt as though time itself had slowed down. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. And still, the dogs led the way, their eyes focused on something only they could see. Then, as if on cue, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier, charged with an unseen force. Dr. Rivers felt a strange pressure build up in his chest, and he could see that Captain Larson was experiencing the same sensation. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end as a distant hum began to fill the air. It wasn't coming from the Exerithians, nor from any technology they had brought with them. It was coming from somewhere else. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. "It's here," Dr. Rivers whispered. His voice was barely audible over the low rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The Exerithians stopped in their tracks. Their expressionless faces remained calm, but the tension in their movements was unmistakable. The dogs, however, began to bark. It wasn't the usual playful barks they had heard earlier. These were urgent, sharp, and filled with warning. Captain Larson's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "What the hell is going on?" Before anyone could answer, the ground before them erupted in a blinding flash of light. It was as though the very fabric of reality had been torn apart. The humans shielded their eyes, stumbling back in surprise as the intense light consumed everything in its path. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light faded, leaving nothing but a swirling void in its wake. "Is that the anomaly?" Captain Larson gasped, his voice shaking. Dr. Rivers could only nod. He had no other words. What they were witnessing was beyond anything he had ever studied. The Exerithians, on the other hand, didn't seem at all fazed. They moved forward, their faces as calm as ever. And the dogs followed without hesitation. It was as if they had seen it all before, and knew exactly what to do. "The dogs," Dr. Rivers started, his voice filled with disbelief. "They can sense it. They're not afraid. They know what this is." Captain Larson, his eyes wide with concern, looked at the swirling anomaly before them. "But what happens now?" Before Dr. Rivers could answer, the Exerithian leader turned toward them. It was the first time since they had arrived that it spoke directly to the humans. "It is time for you to understand," it said, its voice cold and measured. "The anomaly is a tear in the quantum fabric of space. It is not a natural occurrence. It is the result of a force, something far older than the galaxies themselves. This force has been hunting for something, and now it has found us. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The humans exchanged uneasy glances. What did the Exerithians mean? What force could be so powerful that it could rip apart the fabric of reality itself? The Exerithian continued. This force will stop at nothing to consume everything in its path. The dogs of Earth. They are the only beings capable of sensing the anomaly's approach. Without them, the universe would be doomed. Dr. Rivers felt a chill run down his spine. Earth's dogs, the key to saving the galaxy. The Exerithians' words were clear, but the reality of what was at stake was beyond anything they had ever imagined. The universe was on the brink, and humanity had no choice but to rely on the most unlikely of allies, Earth's own dogs, to help them face the unknown. But as the anomaly continued to swirl in front of them, the question remained, would they be able to stop it in time? Or was this the beginning of the end? The tension was unbearable. The fate of everything, Earth, humanity, and the galaxy itself, rested in the hands of the unlikeliest of creatures. The hidden truth. As the swirling anomaly loomed before them, the humans stood frozen, their minds racing with questions. How could something so vast, so ancient, be this close to destroying everything? The Exerithians, who had always been so composed, were now visibly on edge, their sharp eyes constantly darting between the anomaly and the dogs, whose behavior had become increasingly agitated. Captain Larson took a deep breath and stepped forward. "What exactly is this force you're talking about?" he asked, his voice steady, though his hands clenched around his weapon. He wasn't sure if they were dealing with an alien threat, a natural disaster, or something altogether different. The Exerithian leader turned its attention toward him, its expression unreadable. "It is not of this galaxy, nor any galaxy that you know. It is a force that has existed long before civilizations rose and fell. A force that lives within the very fabric of the universe itself." It paused, its cold gaze scanning the humans before continuing. "And it is drawn to this anomaly, this breach in reality." The air around them seemed to thicken, the tension palpable. Every word the Exerithian spoke made the situation feel even more dire, and Captain Larson could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "We have witnessed this before," the Exerithian leader added, its voice betraying a hint of urgency. "But we were not prepared. We believed that the force was a distant thing, that it could not reach us. But now, it is here. It is drawing closer." Dr. Rivers stepped forward, his mind racing. He had heard of many cosmic threats, things that could tear apart galaxies, forces beyond imagination. But this was different. A tear in the fabric of reality itself was not just a threat. It was a cosmic catastrophe waiting to unfold. "How did this happen?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "How did the anomaly get here?" The Exerithian leader's expression darkened. "The anomaly was not created by us. It is an accident, a tear caused by the collapse of an ancient force, one that sought to manipulate time, space, and the very essence of existence." It looked at the dogs, which were now standing perfectly still, their bodies tense, but their eyes sharp and unblinking. Only Earth's dogs can sense the force's presence, as they are attuned to the frequencies of the universe's fabric. They were created, or rather, chosen, for this purpose. No one knows why, but they are the key. Captain Larson exchanged a glance with Dr. Rivers. The idea that Earth's dogs, of all creatures, held the key to saving the galaxy seemed absurd, but the Exerithians had spoken with such certainty. It was clear that they believed it to be true. "The Force, it is not just an entity," the Exerithian leader continued, its voice now tinged with something almost like fear. "It is a presence. It can manipulate and alter the very laws of nature. It is not a creature, but a force of destruction, bent on erasing everything in its path. The only way to stop it is to close the tear." "But how do we close it?" Dr. Rivers asked, his mind spinning. He needed a solution. He couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip away. Do we have the technology to do it? Is there any way to fight this force? The Exerithian leader shook its head slowly. We have tried. We have failed. No technology can fight it. No weapon can destroy it. The only way to stop it is through the energy of the living beings who can sense it. And the dogs of Earth are the only ones who possess this ability. Captain Larson's heart raced. The idea of relying on Earth's dogs to save the galaxy seemed absurd, but the Exerithians were adamant. There was no other choice. The dogs were their only hope. The dogs suddenly began to bark loudly, their eyes fixed on the swirling anomaly. The barking grew more frantic, almost like a warning. Dr. Rivers could feel his pulse quicken as the pressure around them increased, the very air seeming to hum with the presence of the force. We don't have much time, the Exerithian leader said, its voice tense. The force is growing stronger. It will soon be too late to stop it. Captain Larson could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He glanced at Dr. Rivers, who was now visibly shaken. We need to act now, Larson said, his voice firm. Whatever it takes. The Exerithian leader nodded, its eyes locking with the humans. You must follow us, it said. We know where the force will strike next. The dogs will lead us, but we must move quickly. With the Exerithians leading the way, the group quickly fell into formation, the dogs guiding them with their sharp instincts. The landscape around them began to shift. What had once been an empty desert now felt charged, the very ground beneath their feet thrumming with energy. The anomaly was drawing closer, its presence growing stronger with every passing second. As they moved deeper into the desert, Dr. Rivers found himself looking at the dogs with newfound reverence. These creatures, so seemingly ordinary to the humans, were now their only hope. But would they be enough to stop the force? Or would they be too late? Every step felt like an eternity, and with each passing moment, the weight of the situation grew heavier. The fate of Earth, the fate of the galaxy, rested in the hands of these unlikely heroes, the dogs of Earth. The descent into chaos. As they approached the heart of the anomaly, the landscape began to change. The once familiar terrain had transformed into something unrecognizable, twisted and warped by the growing power of the force. The air shimmered, as if reality itself was bending, stretching, and threatening to break apart. The strange energy pulsed with an eerie rhythm, and the ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if it could collapse at any moment. Captain Larson led the group, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to the unknown. The dogs, however, seemed unfazed by the chaos around them. They moved confidently, their ears pricked and their noses twitching, sensing something no one else could. The Exerithians, too, were alert, their expressions tense, but they had come prepared. They knew the stakes, and they understood the gravity of what was at hand. Yet even they appeared shaken, their normally unflappable demeanor now tinged with uncertainty. The force that had drawn them to this planet was unlike anything they had encountered before. Dr. Rivers walked beside Larson, his eyes darting from the dogs to the swirling vortex in the distance. This anomaly, Rivers murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, it's not just tearing through space, it's tearing through time. Do you think that's why the dogs are the only ones who can sense it? Because they're in tune with something beyond time and space. Larson didn't have an answer. He didn't know how to explain it. He had spent most of his life fighting for survival, for order, for structure. But this was chaos on a cosmic scale, and it was beyond anything they had ever faced. The dogs, however, were calm. Too calm, in fact. Larson had seen the way they responded to danger back on Earth, but this was something different. One of the dogs, a large black shepherd named Rex, suddenly stopped in its tracks. It barked once, then stared into the distance, its eyes wide and alert. The other dogs quickly followed suit, their bodies stiffening, their ears raised. Something was coming. Larson stopped, signaling for the group to halt. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low, as if speaking any louder might provoke whatever the dogs had sensed. The Exerithian leader narrowed its eyes. "It's close," it said simply, its voice tense. "The Force is not just a presence. It has intelligence. It can act. It can move. And now it is aware of us." Dr. Rivers' face went pale. "What do you mean, aware of us?" The Exerithian leader's gaze flickered toward the swirling anomaly in the distance. "It has watched us," it said slowly. "And now, it will act to stop us. It will not allow the breach to be sealed." The ground beneath their feet trembled, as if reacting to the words. Larson felt his stomach drop. It was as if the planet itself was alive, its very soul screaming in pain as the force grew stronger. The dogs continued to bark, their bodies shaking, but they didn't run. They stood firm, facing the source of the disturbance. They knew what needed to be done. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the air, an unearthly sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ground cracked open, and tendrils of dark energy shot up from the earth, spiraling into the air like a storm of chaos. The vortex in the distance pulsed, its energy becoming more erratic, more violent. The tear in reality was widening, and it was no longer a passive force. It was attacking. The Exerithians immediately began to prepare, their advanced technology humming as they activated their shields and weapons. But it was clear that nothing they had would be enough to fight the force. This was no conventional enemy. It was a cosmic entity that could not be fought with weapons or technology. It existed beyond their understanding. Rex barked again, more urgently this time, and the other dogs joined in. Their howls echoed across the battlefield, a sound of defiance. It was as if they knew the very fate of the universe depended on their next actions. "Get ready," Captain Larson shouted. "We have to move fast. We can't let the force gain more ground." The group charged forward, but as they did, the force pushed back harder. The air thickened, and the energy crackled, distorting everything around them. It felt like walking through a dream, one that was slowly unraveling at the seams. Larson gritted his teeth and kept running, determined not to stop. He knew that the dogs were leading the way, guiding them toward the center of the disturbance. But as they got closer, the pressure increased, and the dogs' barking grew louder, more frantic. They could feel the imminent danger. In the distance, the swirling vortex seemed to grow in intensity, its dark energy reaching out like a hand, trying to pull them in. The very fabric of reality seemed to tremble as they approached. Larson's heart raced. They were getting closer, but so was the force, and it would stop at nothing to keep them from closing the tier. "Stay close," Larson shouted again, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. The dogs led the charge, their sharp senses guiding the group through the chaos. And as they reached the center of the disturbance, Larson could see it, the source of the force, the epicenter of the anomaly. It was a tear in the very fabric of space, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light, and it was growing larger with every passing moment. "We have to close it now," Dr. Rivers shouted over the noise, panic in his voice, "before it's too late." But as the dogs howled again, Larson realized something. This was only the beginning. The force wasn't just a threat. It was alive, and it had only just begun to fight back. The final stand. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the air grew thick with energy as the tear in the fabric of space expanded before their eyes. Larson's heart raced as the once manageable rift now threatened to swallow them whole. The dogs continued to bark, their howls echoing across the now dying landscape. They had always been the beacons, the warning signs, but now they seemed to sense something far worse, a final push from whatever intelligence controlled this cosmic force. Rex, the lead dog, snarled at the rift. His eyes glowed with a fierce determination, more than just the loyalty and protective instincts they had witnessed before. There was something else there now, something primal and instinctive, something the dogs could not ignore, no matter how terrifying the force had become. They were the planet's last hope. Is it alive? Dr. Rivers whispered, his voice trembling as he stared at the tear. That rift, it's not just a breach in space, it's a wound. And whatever's on the other side, it's not content to stay there. Larson gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. He had seen chaos before. He had fought wars. But nothing had ever prepared him for this. The force, whatever it was sentient. It was not an object to fight. It was a presence that could reach into minds, shift realities, and twist the world as they knew it. The Exerithians, who had been the most prepared among them, stood frozen in shock. Their weapons had no effect. Their shields flickered, briefly resisting the energy only to fail under the pressure of the entity's power. There was no escaping it, no stopping it, not with technology. But the dogs, those earthborn animals, had an understanding of the force that no one else could comprehend. Rex's bark broke through the growing storm. With each bark, the dog's sense of purpose sharpened. It was as if the dogs were calling out, challenging the force to reveal itself, to show its true form. And then, like a crack of thunder, the rift pulsed again. But this time, it responded. A figure appeared within the swirling energy, barely visible at first, but growing clearer with each passing second. It was a shadow, an outline against the storm. It had no physical shape, but its presence was undeniable. A presence that seemed to reach into Larson's very soul, clawing at his thoughts, at his memories. And in the distance, the dogs howled again, as if sensing the thing that had emerged. "That's it," Larson said, his voice low, barely a whisper. "It's not just a tear in space. It's a consciousness, a being, and it's awake." The Exerithians, who had previously been prepared to combat the rift with their weapons, now saw the futility of their actions. Their eyes widened in realization. "No weapon can defeat this," the Exerithian leader said quietly. "This thing is beyond anything we have ever faced." Larson could feel the eyes of his team on him, the weight of their hopes resting on his shoulders. But he didn't have an answer for them. All they could do now was trust the dogs. Rex's bark grew louder. The other dogs joined in, the intensity of their howling reverberating through the ground. It was a call, a challenge, a final warning. The energy around the rift pulsed in response, and the figure within the storm shifted. Larson didn't know how, but it was clear that the dogs understood. They knew what to do. They knew what this force was, what it represented, and how to fight it. "Get ready," Larson ordered, his voice full of urgency. "This isn't over yet." And then, just as suddenly as the storm had intensified, it stilled. The rift began to shrink, the energy pulling inward, as if the entity within was retreating, struggling to regain control over the chaos it had unleashed. The dogs were still barking, but now their howls were triumphant. The figure within the rift flickered once more, its form distorting, as though it was being forced back into the void from which it had come. The dark energy began to dissipate, and the earth beneath their feet settled. The battle was not won, but the immediate danger had passed. Rex stopped barking and stood still, his chest heaving as if he had just finished a great trial. The other dogs stood beside him, their eyes glowing with the same fierce energy. They had won this round, but Larson knew the entity would return. The war had only just begun. "We need to close it," Dr. Rivers said, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. "The breach is closing, but it's not gone. It'll only grow stronger." Larson nodded. "And we'll be ready." The group stood there, their gazes locked on the slowly shrinking rift. The dogs were alert, their bodies still tense, prepared for whatever would come next. The Exerithians, who had once seen themselves as the galaxy's protectors, now stood humbled, their weapons still deactivated. They had underestimated humanity, just as they had underestimated the dogs. But it wasn't just the humans or the Exerithians who had the strength to face what was coming. It was the dogs, and whatever secret bond they shared with the planet, with the very fabric of space itself, had proven to be the key to surviving this nightmare. The storm was fading, but Larson knew this was only the beginning. There were more battles to fight, more enemies to face, and they would fight them all, as long as they had the dogs by their side. Because if the galaxy feared one thing, it was not the strength of human weapons or technology. It was the mysterious, unfathomable power of Earth's dogs. The battle for survival was far from over, but Larson had no doubt now. They would not give up. They could not.